When you think of MBA candidates, you probably imagine consultants or bankers or engineers even, not fashion designers. But for Ashwini Deshpande, creativity wasn't a detour from the MBA path. In just 2 months, she went from working as a designer at Meta, have you heard of it, to scoring a 750 on the old version of the GMAT exam, which is roughly a 715 on the current exam score scale, and earning admission and a scholarship to Northwestern's Kellogg School of Management. In this episode, we're going to unpack how she did it, the mindset shift that turned a daunting test into an exciting challenge, the 2-month sprint that changed her trajectory, and how those GMAT skills still show up in business school and consulting today. Ashwini, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. So excited to be here. This is actually a podcast I did listen to when I was preparing for the GMAT. So for undergrad, I went to London College of Fashion. I specialized in fashion design and development, which is literally like pattern cutting, sewing, sketching, all of that stuff, making physical clothes. I graduated during COVID, so that's what drew me into digital fashion and fashion technology. I started designing skins for games, things like that. And from there, once I graduated, I went to a digital fashion startup. And then a year later, I went to Meta. That's when they just, Facebook had just changed their name to Meta. They were really focused on the metaverse and they wanted to create some fashion for the metaverse. I was on a team doing R&D, trying to get AI to actually create clothes for avatars in the metaverse. So super cool job. But yeah, along the way somewhere I realized that I actually really love the business side. And while I chose to study design at 18, I wanted to move into the business side later on. And so I started thinking about business school somewhere along the way.
What a unique job. It reminds me when I was in college, I worked part-time job in a costume shop. So I was sewing and mostly ironing. They were like, Zach, you can do the ironing.
The ironing is the worst part.
Yeah, well, not when you look at my sewing. So how long were you at Meta before you caught that business bug?
So I think around the time I was joining Meta, I kind of already decided I wanted to apply to business school. It was that startup experience before Meta that really made me realize I wanted to be in the business side of things. It was a startup where I was literally the first full-time employee. And for the major part when I was there, I was the only employee. So it was just me and the founder. And the founder also did not have a business background. He was, he had like an advertising and design background. And so, we had to do all of these things like pricing our product, pitching to clients, all these business things. And I was kind of figuring them out along the way while I worked there. And I really enjoyed that process. I enjoyed trying to figure out like, oh, do we price this at $10 or $200? And so I started thinking maybe business school is a good path for me. And my dad went to business school, so I kind of knew what that would look like as well. And so around then I got the opportunity to join Meta. So I thought this is a great opportunity. I'm going to go, but I'm only going to be there for maybe a year and a half. And then I knew I wanted to pivot to business school. So yeah, most of my time at Meta, I was focused on things like the GMAT and doing my applications.
So I'm glad you brought up the GMAT because I was just going to ask you, like, what was that moment when you were like, I got to take this thing?
So when I started looking at business schools, I obviously knew that it would involve these sort of competitive exams. So I felt like I needed to just get that out of the way to really figure out, like, where can I apply? What's a realistic goal for me? Should I be applying to the M7? Should I be aiming lower than that? I kind of didn't really have an idea at the time. And I felt like the GMAT would help me kind of get a benchmark for like, where do I stand in terms of the application process? And I did feel like doing well on the GMAT would make a huge difference for me, especially as someone who's a fashion designer. I think I had a really interesting background. I had, worked at Meta and done all these cool things and very innovative things as well in my career. And my undergraduate grades were good, all of that. But I really felt like GMAT would be make it or break it for me, because that's really how the business schools would be able to evaluate whether I'd be able to keep up with their, quant curriculum and things like that, whether I would be competitive in that sense. And so GMAT was definitely like a very kind of initial hurdle that I felt like I need to get through to even like move forward in that process of applications.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. When I was applying to business school and my background is non-traditional as well in theater, like I just mentioned, I really was like, oh, this program I'm interested in and want to apply to, I don't need to take a test. I have enough work experience that I could maybe get a waiver, but I have no math to speak of. So I took the GMAT to like sort of, show that I'm on the same playing field. I've got these skills, even if I didn't necessarily believe it myself at the time. But I did study and, got a score that I was okay with. But it really did make me think about the test in a different way, having this unique background. Did you find that your creative background made you view either program research or even like studying for the GMAT a little bit differently from maybe other people you've talked to?
I do think so. I think honestly, I approached it with a little bit more enthusiasm because I'd done math in high school and I actually used to really enjoy math. And it was the same with kind of verbal, like I love reading, but again, had never like kind of done those things in an academic capacity after high school. So it was kind of exciting and fun to kind of go back to that, especially given that my day job was unrelated to that. So it was almost like a break. I was doing something very different after my day job to prepare for the GMAT.
So speaking of prep, great segue. How did you first approach GMAT prep? Because it can be just very overwhelming. I admit there's a lot of resources out there. There's a lot of official stuff, unofficial stuff, all these great test prep organizations which have their own courses and way of approaching things. How did you start?
So I started as most people start. I bought the official GMAT books and started kind of looking through what is the curriculum, started doing some of those problems just to kind of get an idea of where I stand. And then I did that for a few weeks. I wasn't working like a few hours a day. I was maybe doing like 2 or 3 hours just over the weekend just to start getting an idea of it. And then I started to also look at all of these prep sites because I felt like, okay, there's plenty of official GMAT material, but I would like to also have a little bit more and more maybe explanations as well. And so I explored a couple of different platforms, and that's when I got an ad for a Target Test Prep. And I remember there was like a $1 for the first week free trial type of thing. So I signed up to that just to see how it is. And I think what set TTP apart from the others was just like honestly the UI at first for me. Like the user experience was really good. It felt very intuitive, the website, where some of the other ones felt pretty clunky. They felt like websites from like the 90s. And so for me, like as a designer, that was really appealing. And I was like, okay, this one is the platform that seems to be suiting me best right now. And after using it for a week, I felt like it was super useful. And I thought, okay, I definitely think it's worth getting a subscription for this. So I got a 1 month subscription and then extended that and got another month. So I basically used Target Test Prep for 2 months plus the official GMAT book.
So did you plan to just study for 2 months, or that's just sort of how it shook out?
So I started studying for it, and ideally, I started studying for it right after I came back from Christmas break and New Year's and all of that. And I was in London and the weather was super cold. None of my friends really had the enthusiasm to go out and like, go have fun or go to parties when it was that kind of temperature outside. So I thought as spring comes around, April, May, like it's going to be way harder to stay at home and study. So honestly, winter is the time to get this over with when I can really put my head down and do the most. And so I started really kind of working hard at it in January. And I had studied for maybe like 2 or 3 weeks when I took my first mock test. I remember I got a 650. And at the time, I mean, I was aiming for like a 690, 700. I was thinking like that would be a really good score for me. I didn't think I would be able to go beyond that. But I thought, okay, like that means I'm doing reasonably well. And I thought, let me take a couple more mock tests. And once I get to that 700 mark and I start feeling like I can comfortably get a 700, that's when I'll book my test. And so I took my next test where I got, I think, a 690. And then the third one was a 710. And then it started climbing quite fast. And I was like, actually, I think I can aim even higher. But at that point, I was definitely like, okay, I think I'm getting a comfortable 700. And that's when I booked my test. I booked it for, I think it was April 4th. And I also knew that in that case, if, it didn't go well on April 4th, I could wait another month, retake it in May, and still have plenty of time to apply for round one. And so, yeah, that seemed like a good timeline for me. And I ended up that way just taking 2 months. It wasn't necessarily a plan I had from the beginning.
Yeah, that's great. Congratulations, of course. I mean, to have
Thank
that
you.
sort of trajectory is awesome. And even more important, I think it's so valuable for listeners to hear, like starting early has some immense benefits. Of course, like studying when people are hibernating is a great way to not have like that FOMO of missing out on things in your social life, or maybe even like a busy time in your job. And if you just start like just a couple minutes, because most people will start studying in like that April, May timeline, which really cuts it close to those round one deadlines if you decide to retest or anything like that. I'm so glad also that you had such success with TTP. Scott, the founder, has been on the show, and he's a great guy. And there's so many different test prep providers out there, and some are newer and I think maybe have like more of that like internet age, AI, UI kind of thing first. And then there's other ones that have been like legacy that like really have it down pat when it comes to like in the classroom or using physical books. And I think being able to know what type of learner you are and the kind of interface or structure that works best for you is super important when you begin your prep journey.
Yeah, for sure. No, definitely agree. I think TTP really changed the trajectory of my journey as well. Like it just made it so much easier to prep for the GMAT.
So I want to go back to something that you alluded to earlier, which was you were going to take a practice exam, see how you scored, and let that sort of determine what type of school or programs you're interested in. And I have to say that in my time doing the podcast and chatting with other folks, and even right now, thinking about going and getting my executive MBA, this is a very common approach. Did you find that as you were getting higher scores that it helped you narrow down your search?
Definitely. I think at first I did want to apply to the M7 schools, but I was not sure if that was a realistic goal. And I think as I started getting, over 700, I felt like that was definitely becoming a more realistic goal for me. And eventually when I actually took the GMAT and got a 750, I decided I was only applying to my 4 absolute reach schools. So I actually only applied to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and Kellogg, which, has its risks, but I felt really strongly about, okay, I have this really unique background, but I also have a really strong GMAT. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence to go into it and say, I'm only applying to these 4 schools, which are my reach schools. And I also knew that the GMAT obviously is valid for a couple of years. So I was on the lower end in terms of work experience. I had less than 2 years of work experience when I applied, which is obviously like way on the lower end. And so I was thinking if I don't get into one of these schools, then my GMAT score will continue to be valid for some time. So I can always reapply a year from now.
And this is a great reminder for folks listening too, which is like you don't need a perfect score to get into a school, but a score can help you if you maybe have some perceived deficiency in some other aspect of your application. Like, if you have only a few years of work experience or your undergrad GPA is really low or something like that. So, all these parts of an application really work together to tell your whole story. So how did you decide on Kellogg?
So I think Harvard, Stanford, Wharton were very much for me like, they're the big names, they're the big 3. And so I knew that I was going to put in those applications. The 4th school, I was unsure of. I was looking at, all of the other options. I was looking at Kellogg and the other school here that we don't, the one that's not to be named when you go to Kellogg, Booth, the fake rivalry we've got with them.
I thought you were going to say Hogwarts.
No. If GMAT could get me into Hogwarts, then I would definitely be at Hogwarts right now. Yeah, so I was looking at Kellogg, I was looking at Booth, I was looking at MIT Sloan. I also spoke to some people from Berkeley Haas. I did briefly consider the New York schools as well, NYU and Columbia. So I was looking at a bunch of different schools, but eventually I ruled out the New York schools because I wanted to have a very different kind of MBA experience with a lot of kind of campus life and that sort of atmosphere where you're always hanging out with your business school friends versus I think New York, you get a slightly different experience like I got for my undergrad in London where, people are living a little bit far away, they're commuting into class, and they go back and they usually have their friends in the city outside of school. And that's not really the experience I wanted. I wanted to be able to walk to class, walk to my friends' houses, hang out after school, be part of extracurriculars, all of that. So in that sense, I was looking at a couple of other schools. MIT Sloan, I spoke to some people. I think somehow with me and my background, they just felt like it may not be a very good fit. And so I trusted them with that. And then similar with Booth, it's very like finance focused school. So eventually I decided Kellogg, especially given marketing and I come from fashion, it just felt like a really good fit. And everyone I spoke to as well, like the culture seemed amazing. Everyone seemed super happy at Kellogg. And so eventually I narrowed down to Kellogg for my 4th choice. And I honestly could not be happier. Like Kellogg is the place where I fit in really well and I'm having the best possible experience I think I could have had. So I think, you pick the school, but also the school picks you and they do a good job. I think Kellogg knew that I would fit into Kellogg.
That's awesome. I'm so happy to hear that. So now you're at Kellogg, you're in Evanston. Beyond admissions and getting you in, have you found that any of like your GMAT prep has helped you within the classroom? Has it carried over to your coursework or even recruiting?
Absolutely. You mentioned recruiting. It definitely has helped with the recruiting. I think number one, like when you're applying to consulting, your GMAT score does matter. That is something that they look at. Maybe it's not like the major factor, but it definitely comes into consideration. So, that's in big bold letters on my CV. And that's definitely something the consulting firms look at. And then while doing like case interviews as well, the math that you're doing is quite similar to GMAT in a sense. It's not super difficult math, but it is like it can be a little bit tricky and you do have to be able to do it fast without making any mistakes. So that to me felt very similar to kind of GMAT prep in a sense. And I think that really helped. And I actually ended up getting another like 1 week trial of target test prep just while doing recruiting, just to kind of do a bit of revision on some of that mental math. So I definitely did go back.
What would you tell other candidates, especially those coming from those like creative or non-traditional backgrounds, about tackling the GMAT and really like the overall MBA process?
I think number one with the GMAT, don't be afraid. Treat it like a fun challenge rather than something that's daunting. Treat it as like, oh, I'm going to challenge myself. Like, how well can I do? And really, I think go into it without, don't feel like I need to take this amount of time because somebody else did it in this amount of time. And this is how much I need to get because that's how much someone else got. Like, everyone has their own journey and trajectory, I think. Really focus on not just doing a bunch of problems, but making sure you're like really incorporating feedback every single time, being very self-reflective every single day and planning your path accordingly with how you prep. And then just like working on doing your best. Because I think like I was super surprised. Like I was not expecting a 750 in any world. I remember seeing once that somebody from a non-traditional background had like a 730. And I was like, oh my God, but that person had a 730. There's no way I can apply to the schools they applied to. And then I started doing the prep and I ended up with a 750, which was, it blew my mind that I was able to do that. So I think for anyone out there, like, I think you can do better than you think. It's just about really putting your head down, as I said, like being super self-reflective and doing the prep in like a smart way as well. So yeah, like go for it. You've got this. And then in terms of general business school applications, I would say coming from non-traditional background actually is a huge advantage, if anything. I think the reason people sometimes think it's a disadvantage is for exactly this reason, right? Like it's more difficult to ace the GMAT because you maybe don't have a quant background and things like that. So I think some of these little things could go against you, but actually the majority of it is in your favor. Not a lot of people are even applying from the fashion industry. So my chances of getting in are probably way better than someone who's applying with like a business background with 750 GMAT because they're expected to have a 750. The MBA schools are looking for people who become alum and become successful in different areas and fields. And if you're coming from fashion and they think you can be a leader in fashion, they don't have as many students who are represented in that way. And so I think it can be a huge advantage to really lean into your background, lean into your creative side and your non-traditional background.
I co-sign everything that you just said. I often find that it's my theater skills that I use way more in my marketing career than anything I learned getting my master's in marketing. And I think it's just like the unique thing that is not just like the touchstone of like who I am as a professional, but it's also this thing that shapes the way I think of things. And sometimes like being able to think of things differently, certainly in consulting, can really make all the difference in your work.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more.
Any other takeaway that you hope listeners get from hearing your journey?
I guess just to believe in themselves and kind of move forth with confidence. I mean, I think everything worked out in the best way possible for me, which I mean, I was expecting to face hurdles and I almost didn't, right? Like GMAT went better than I planned. Of course, it was tough at times. Like there were days when, I would do really badly on a test and then I had to kind of recover from that. But at the end of the day, it worked out really well. And it was the same with, getting into Kellogg. Sure, I didn't get into the other three schools, but I actually ended up getting into the school where I fit in best. And then it's the same with consulting as well. Like applying to MBB seemed like definitely like a reach for me, but After doing GMAT, I definitely felt like I could do the same thing, like put my head down and really like work super hard at it for like 2 months. And now I'm going to BCG New York, which I'm super excited about. So yeah, like it all does work out for the best. I'd say just have the confidence because you're not traditional. That does not mean that you don't deserve the same opportunities.
I love that. Congratulations on everything. Thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Of course, thanks for having me. This is super fun.
Ashwini's story is a reminder that your background does not define your ceiling. It's your mindset that does. So by reframing the GMAT as a challenge rather than an obstacle, approaching it with enthusiasm, she was able to not only unlock a top score, but open up so many doors. You can follow Ashwini's Kellogg journey on Instagram, offering a behind-the-scenes look at classes, campus life, what it's really like to be a business student with a fashion tech edge. And as always, you can find more episodes of this podcast, prep tools, and resources to start your own business school journey on MBA.com. If you enjoyed this conversation, be sure to follow us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, even YouTube, wherever you like to get your podcasts. Inside the GMAT is brought to you by GMAC. I'm GMAC Zach. And until next time.